I can start with welcoming you to the Zoom.
Thank you very much.
So Ulrike,
Thank you.
welcome to the Zoom Zone. Basically, this is a creative space for dialogue where we are exploring our ideas as the Zone and obviously our guest, in this case you today, and just getting to know each other through conversation. It's a very, very casual exchange of ideas. We've got a few questions lined up for you that you are free to answer as you wish. You can throw them back at us. It's supposed to be a kind of very easy back and forth rather than any kind of big inquiry into your life. But we obviously want to find out who you are, what you're doing, and some of the thoughts behind some of that that you're doing, and some of the interests that you might have that we can discuss together. It's also a free space to share material if you like. The sharing function is open for all of us. So if there's anything that comes up that we're thinking of that we want to throw in, let's do that. And the intention of the Zoom Zone is also that we take our conversation and we package it somehow in a kind of roughly edited, very raw video that can then sit online and we can refer back to if we want to, or we can share it with others if we need to. So that's the main intention of today. So thank you for joining us and for your time. And we've had a few conversations before, and we specifically, I'm going to start sharing already in the background behind me, we specifically had a beautiful encounter in the studio where you and I had our first proper introduction to each other, not so in as many words as there were drawings and interactions through drawing and playing in the studio. I mean, we spoke a lot, but I really love what happened
Yes.
to the studio. So I'm going to let this run as maybe the first few questions come up, and we can watch this in the background while it's going.
That's great. I'm really curious to see how our conversations changes with the format changing, right? We had these super open and just flowing conversations with lots of depth, and I wonder if Zoom and this kind of framework here is inhibiting us to share as openly. Let's see. It's kind of a meta research aspect here.
So maybe that's the first question. Is that always part of your practice that you have to add in a meta research process into it?
Nice. No, it's not. This is a relatively recent development that I'm also questioning the process of what we're doing, and that's what this meta research is. So for me, it questions the art and science encounters the practice with specific intent, I guess. So to ask, because I've been working in and across art and science for so many years and facilitating art science collaborations and encounters, the next step was naturally, well, what does this actually do? Because I can feel and I can see that it does so many wonderful things, but to put it in a research framework or language corresponding to specific questions, and that's the meta research. Nice. Oh, I really like that. What's behind you there? Yeah.
I should hide away.
Fantastic. No, it was wonderful, free flowing. I felt a bit lost at the beginning when you just put all the materials on the table. So what are we going to do here? And it was just one magic dual session that exploded into creative making. It's nice.
And so the maybe that's I'd like to throw the ball or the virtual stick to Yogi or Bronwyn to kind of kick off with something that you'd like to know. I know we have a list of questions about who this person is that's joining us. Let it flow.
Well, we know already a little bit who Ulrike is, but I don't think people who may be watching this in the future will. So the best thing to start would be for you, Ulrike, to quickly tell us what you want everyone to know about yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so this, not knowing the audience, but I guess you can briefly summarize my path by saying that I am both a scientist and an artist, and the thing in between. So I, many years ago, started to study astrophysics, and then 2 years later also got accepted into art school. And from that time on, I studied art, and so fine arts, and my degree was painting. I studied paintings and astrophysics simultaneously. For the longest time, I wanted to divide these things and do one on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the other on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 2 different ways of understanding the world with different methods and languages, where I didn't want to decide. And honestly, I was just very naive and didn't realize that usually people decide one path or the other early on, and I didn't feel that I could or wanted to decide. And so naively did both. But I realized after several years that this division is not working for me, and that I really need both to make sense of the questions that I had and of the world and my approaches to them. So when it came to my 2 master's theses that were happening roughly around the same time, it was actually my supervisor in arts that encouraged me, so gave me the last kind of kick to combine them. And so I was using the same data and similar related questions to explore both in art and science. And so that was the beginning of my personal art science practice. Then I continued with a PhD in astrophysics, and during that time I kind of went deeper into the traditional academic scientific trajectory, and art became a bit smaller, although I continued to do exhibitions and had and artwork, created art on my own. And then after my PhD, I continued with some postdoc positions in the UK that were in astrophysics. But I always continued with art at some capacity or other, with creativity. I'm not just a scientist in that respect. And so more and more I started to work with others, with other artists that are interested in scientific context or concepts, and then opened the door towards the world that is art science, and realized how many other people are these hybrid beings like us that are have a foot in both worlds, or have some way of drawing from both kind of knowledge domains. And so I'm more and more working with others in this, and enabling and creating art science collaborations for others, to situate them into academic structures, into universities. So that's a big part right now, to make artists in residence available, but also clarify and make the scientists understand what this is, why I think it's important to invest in it, the impact of working with people that are trained in thinking in different ways, trying your own artistic, creative paths. And so this has then morphed into this, what we call meta research, into researching the research. So the process of art and science meeting and extracting the good stuff that's happening, and making that part of our research process as we're pushing for big fundamental questions. On the side, this also means enabling engagement, enabling communication, enabling creative ways that are becoming smaller and smaller in our traditional scientific academic paths. So this opens to policy, this opens to the public becoming a voice in science. So there are many, many applications and benefits that I'm looking at, that I'm enabling, and that I'm researching. Perhaps I should say I'm based in the UK, at the University of Nottingham, where currently I'm in this position where I'm 50% paid to be an astrophysics researcher and 50% for an art science doer researcher. Yeah.
So, I mean, my first response, what I find fascinating about your story is that, you know, you used the word naive at one point to say there you are wanting to pursue both paths, which you did pursue, and pulling that off within institutions is no small feat. And yet 550 years before that, you would have been labeled a polymath, certainly if you were in a different gendered body, right? And so I find that really interesting, that how backward we have slid as individuals and humans and institutionally within half a century. And certainly I wonder if you were even in this moment with this brain and this curiosity in a different gendered body, you may have been received differently with these two different curiosities. I also think it's interesting that it was your art supervisor that encouraged the two disciplines finding one another, so that there's a kind of more of a tendency for those boundaries to be blurred. Of course, it always comes down to individuals who kind of, you know, because it could as well have been an astonishing science supervisor or astronomy supervisor. But I think obviously we live within these systems that hold us back and that birth us. And so you are an enabler. You're building spaces for others because you were anything but naive. I think you were doing what is actually natural. The two impulses to paint and to wonder what exists beyond this ball of mass that we're spinning around on are in fact one and the same impulse. And the fact that you had to do two very separate degrees that could never meet are just sort of almost bureaucratic errors of the last 500 years.
Yeah. I have so many responses to that because as we know, this is the operational challenge that we're in, that universities or knowledge production has progressed in this way that it has right now, that universities are set up in these very rigid structures, in these silos that are the faculties, and they're divided by disciplines. And even though there is interaction between them, our path into these faculties is very separated. And I'm saying naive because I did not know about that, I guess, although I had to decide, like many others early on, like at 14, I had to decide which school to go to, and that's already a first indication of, well, are you going down this route or that route? I actually went to a school for tourism and economics because I liked traveling, and I thought that was a good idea at that time, and had very little maths and chemistry and physics and these things, which did not inhibit me from pursuing a career in astronomy and astrophysics. But this is specific to the country that I grew up in, which is Austria. I now live in the UK, and when I give talks to early career researchers or undergraduate students here and tell them about my story, they say, well, I'm interested in art too. How can I do what you did? And early on, I naively said, well, just go sit in the lecture room of the arts faculty. You know, that's what I did. Even in the first years, I always went into the history department and into the art department, etc. But they are not allowed to here. They would have to pay fees. They're already paying high tuition fees. It's much more rigid. It's much more schooled than in the free-ish university system that I grew up in. So I was allowed to do that and did not know that it's uncommon, although many others are trying out different disciplines, I guess, in Austria. So that's a political decision, that's a historical decision, but in general, in the world, universities are becoming more and more divided. There are good reasons for having faculties. I'm not saying we should get rid of all of them. And I think it was Donna Haraway who said, our bodies are finite and our knowledge is finite. We cannot know everything, but we also know that there's so many ways to understanding the world around us, and different languages, I guess. And if you are able to speak many of them or tap into them and make those connections and associations, that's, I think, what pushes us forward. And that's also at least one definition of creativity relates to, making fresh connections and associations with things that are already available. I guess related to that, I'm really currently driven by this notion of curiosity that Perry Zurn is the first author, I think. It's a book called Curious Minds, I think. Let me put that in the chat though when I find it, because they are defining 3 types of curiosity. The busybody, the hunter, and the butterfly. So the first is this person that wants to know everything and has like 1,000 tabs open in their browser, and you can talk to them about anything. I think many of us can relate to that. The second, the hunter, is this deep dive that I see a lot in my colleagues in the sciences. So they go down, become the experts for 10,000 hours, pursuing the one thing and deep in a narrow path. And then the dancer is the person that connects the things and are always, well, why don't we try the method from over here onto that? And we may have tendencies for one of these, but we can also jump around and apply this and that. And I think if your brain is flexible enough and is trained to, do many different activities, but also learn in very different ways, then you're probably more able to make those connections and jump around like that and become a dancer.
Beautiful. Very nice.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second? Because I think
yes.
I think you need today, in the depth of knowledge that we have, specialization, right? And also, I think this takes time, that 80,000 hours or whatever to become a real expert or something. But
10,000 hours, they say.
So that, I don't know who measured that, actually. That's on very shaky evidential grounds, I think. But so I'm really curious about what you said before about connections, because we've discussed offline before about the value of making those connections. So the actual process of establishing those connections and how this is not appreciated. So there are 2 aspects to this. First of all, it's not appreciated how much time and effort this is.
Yeah.
And so it's often seen in this age of specialization as a waste of time. So why, because you have limited resources, why would you profit from learning everything, right? So we talked about how many of the collaborations between scientists and artists stay at a multidisciplinary stage or interdisciplinary stage where people from different disciplines work next to each other or work with each other. But what you're trying to achieve is transdisciplinarity. That is, you are trying to be both the artist and the scientist. Doesn't that just divide your attention over too many places? So I want to very specifically ask, what are these connections that are happening there? What are the things that you look for when you engage in these activities and how you connect them personally? And what you look for when you facilitate an interaction between different people, how you make them engage with the other's point of view. If you could give us a bunch of examples maybe that out of the work that you've actually done, because you've done beautiful work in this area, how this works and what you want to achieve with it.
Yeah, that was quite a lot in there now. So I think the best word that encapsulates what I'm trying to do is integration. And so an integrator, and that actually comes out of the research for inter and transdisciplinarity, are those people that are facilitating, translating, accommodating, assisting the other people in coming together. So that would be the enabling part, I guess, of another group that includes me, because the integrator is also part of the knowledge production to come up with new, with new knowledge. And both art and science are knowledge creating disciplines, just to clarify that. There are different ways of knowledge, and often the arts rely on embodied knowledge, but not necessarily. But in any case, both are knowledge creating disciplines. This happens for example, in an art science collaboration that I'm integrating right now. So I've co-founded the ARTlab here at the University of Nottingham. That's this incubation space that is situated inside the Faculty of Science, so disrupting it from within a little bit, where we have a series of artists in residence that are coming and are part of, to different varying degrees, part of a science research group that specifically works on questions related to quantum physics and very, very early universe phenomena and black holes. And it takes some time for both to understand the other's point of view. So that's where the translation comes in. There's a lot of me facilitating the conversations and translating. But when right now there is one artist that is part of a new experiment, so is at same eye level part of the research group, and so comes up with ideas based on his aesthetic intuitions or his experience and competencies that the scientists had not thought of or actually dismissed because of the conventions in the field. And so by insisting on trying these in his studio and from his artistic practice and prototyping and hacking of all the creative computation and everything that he does, presented his experiments to them, which were big aha moments to the scientists, because they had dismissed it because it was dismissed in the papers, but now has started new conversations, new questions, new experiments. And so the new experiment is taking a new approach, which is potentially groundbreaking. So that's just one example of really impacting the research process. There are many other ways, because science is socially produced and we need to communicate in order to create these experiments, or in my case, observations. We huddle around telescopes. There's 1,000 people in our collaborations. It's all fragmented. We don't know how to actually communicate with one another. where art expression and communication is just such a big part, not always, but often it is. And so being part of that and testing these things and learning different ways of communication and different modes is just so beneficial, from not a direct, here's a new idea, but it's all part of the making and creating of scientific research. And so art can help with that as well. So the benefits are just enormous. There's so much evidence for that in our research interviews and surveys, but also just anecdotally from the things that I hear. There's always you help me to see and think differently, and this push and pull at the beginning where everything is on the table, and you pick the interesting aspects of something. It just gets wider with the arts in the mix. The kind of out there questions that the arts often ask let something loose in the brains, but it's really a variety of benefits that relate to creativity, communication, so on many levels. You also mentioned in your question inter and transdisciplinarity. So there are different definitions of these. I think in my mind, one big aspect of transdisciplinarity is to reach outside of academia, so to reach the non-academic voices. And in this case, that's often, for me, the artists, so the creative industries and the creative businesses, the artists themselves, but it can be anything. So in another art science collective that I co-lead, it's called SEADS, that stands for Space Ecologies, Art and Design. It's a international collective of several hundred people that are all broadly interested in, or are artists and scientists and engineers and technologists and educators. And here we are working a lot with communities, so creating artwork where people from the public are invited to join, to be part of that conversation, to include their, lived experiences and knowledge in the making of art. And one output is the sculpture that is then presented in an art gallery. But all the ideas and conversations that are happening as part of the process are, of course, a huge archive of knowledge that gets picked up in other places. And that's often hidden, right? So this intuitive and also deliberate influencing of the different spheres is what art science enables. And the research of art science tries to put a spotlight on what these things are and where they're going.
So it's in the process, right? Just to clarify that.
Yeah.
So the value is not in the outcome. It's in the process of establishing that connection. It's a transformative process for people that are involved in the collaboration.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's also wonderful output, but there is a frustration that I have, and many of us have, that our university institution and funding bodies are focusing so much on outputs and deliverables, and you have to check off the deliverables, but there is less looking at the process that takes us to the outputs. So I feel like art science is so beneficial in this, in transforming, as you say, that process, in order to, if we make that right, we can get the outputs right and have those amazing, groundbreaking outputs as well. But it really emphasizes, I think, the research process, the getting there, all the things that are happening before we can then publish the paper. Any other questions, or should I just continue, because you also had the deep dive into your question? But Marcus, you were going to say something.
No, maybe let's go into the deep dive. I guess the evidence of showing the process is often so difficult for someone to consume.
Yeah.
Sitting in a place where you have to package everything into something that's understandable to the audience that you're addressing, and very often process-based representations of anything, even be it science or art, it's difficult for someone to understand unless you deep dive in your research to something like that, unless it's relevant for, for the hunter, because the hunter would want to understand that, because in the process sometimes is where the other evidence lies that you need. And so I guess we're always caught in this question of translation, of compression, of mediation, of representation. And there's a question brewing. I just wanted to voice that because I think it lends itself maybe to the next thing you want to say, because I do think you've still got something to answer of Yogi's before I throw another question in.
Oh, okay.
We're going to go into deep dive.
Well, yes, but you also triggered something related to compression and reduction. And so there is a good point towards some tensions that are between art and science, I think. Putting that on the table. So the science, or the way that science is communicated, the outputs, let's say, are very reductionist. So they are perhaps abstractions or reductions, those models that are trying to capture some process or some phenomena that is observed. So there's this reductionist view, I think, in the sciences, whereas in the arts, this is expansion and expanding the field and pushing the boundaries. Not always, but these are, now I'm putting the kind of black and white comparisons out there. And so this about expression and expansion versus reduction is something very interesting for me, because in order to get to really grasp a question or a topic or a new piece of understanding, don't we need both? Don't we need to go diversified first? So this divergent thinking, that is the first part of creativity, this thinking wide, and then coming back together, that convergent thinking of that's more. So this is more the imagination and the arts, and this is more the logic and the science. And this dance of divergence and convergence thinking back and forth, that's the ingredients for new creative ideas. So that's one way of defining creativity as well. And we know that this is happening very well in social settings with others, with other ideas, with other ways of understanding, with other methodologies. So that what brings us so much for the divergence thinking. Possibly this is the busybodies, and then the convergence here could be the deep dive, and is the logic, and is what the scientists are trained so much in. And whether you are trained and qualified in these or in this relates back to the decision that you make when you're 14 years old, and which university and which school you go into. And in the UK, it's especially harsh. Like, they really only have then 4 subjects towards the end of their school year, and really have to decide, am I going to go into the sciences or into the arts? So none of that dancing around and keeping everything open, at least. Again, this is the black and white scenario. So the frustration lies a lot in the structures, in the organization of how knowledge is produced. I mean, that, comes to our frustration of how knowledge production is funded, and all the way through to the education and teaching of the learners that are here for the next generation of knowledge production.
I want to maybe pick up on your experience, just noting on something that Bronwyn said earlier, and now around that. Is there a reciprocal process at the moment for you from the 2 fields that you're experiencing of knowledge production, from the sciences and from the arts, and seeing that you are working in the space between, where early on something was said around which side is maybe a little bit more lenient towards certain ways of working, etc. And I'm just, the reason I'm asking it, at a university, we know that in South Africa, they started a Master's in Arts, in Digital Arts. So it's in the art faculty, a Digital Arts Master, and they welcomed anybody to join, even if you didn't have an undergraduate arts degree. And the funny response from all of us was, great, we're going to start doing an engineering master's without an undergraduate engineering degree. And everyone said, no, you can't do that, because it's the reality is that the art department wanted to attract those that are in the field of engineering, etc., because they were interested in that, I guess, the input. And the reciprocal process was not there. And they've since tried, but it's just not happening. Now they're doing artist residencies like you're talking about, inserting artists into these spaces in order to benefit somehow. And yet the person organizing it keeps on expressing how frustrating it is that there's no real reciprocal research or attempt to understand the value of inserting these two. And I guess a lot of arts experts complaining, again, within the university, that how can you teach someone that doesn't have an undergraduate arts degree when there's so much stuff that they don't know? And now they know nothing about art history. They know nothing about digital art history. I mean, there's a whole genre that's being ignored. And at the same time, we don't want to, we want to open up the field. So I just would, I want to hear how you flow between these two spaces and the reciprocal responses of the two.
I guess to answer the question is then, because this is what you're doing, which is quite different to what any of us are doing within the zone. And so your reflections on the importance of doing the work that you're doing, the birthing of these spaces that you're doing at an institutional level, that is in essence what we're interested in, and the challenges that sit within that.
Yeah, there's a lot of topics and responses in words that I could answer that. One is this: do you need a institutional qualification in order to be part of that club? While there may be very valuable lived experience that doesn't come with a degree diploma at the end, that should allow you to be part of that conversation and part of that table. So I don't know the details, but I recently heard that there, even here in my university, are is it postdocs or without PhD? So something that you can be part of the research force without that qualification. So that would be a radical transdisciplinary approach, I think, to use a non-academic stakeholder, so someone that is not part of the academic structures in the research, and make space for that. So there are programs that do that now. And when it was discussed here at my institute, there were very different responses. There was, how can you do that without having a PhD? But also, well, there is plenty of other ways of coming about knowledge that don't involve sitting in a lecture room and doing exams. And we know that this excludes people that have different ways of thinking and communicating. And there are many, many people that just don't perform in the exams that are needed to get that degree, etc. So I think it's a much more democratic way of knowledge production, to open that and to just break with the conformities, you know what I mean, with the conventions. And I'm all for that, because I can see it with the residents. That is some sneaky way of that, how much enthusiasm, knowledge, experience, and many other competencies, social and anyway, there's so many different paths to bring those to the table. The reciprocal process, that's an interesting one, because I've kind of been pulled and pushed between two very extreme disciplines and fields. And that's at times in my now 20 years of doing this push and pull, I felt like the arts were very, nope, don't let them into our sacred space. And at other times it was the opposite, that the scientists were very protective of their space. So I think kind of what Bronwyn said also, that it comes down to individuals that are spearheading and opening up doors and convincing other people. So it may start with someone that has had personal experience or has a hobby that brings something to them personally, or is just open from other perspectives. So sometimes it really hangs on individuals, and that makes it very frustrating that we are at the mercy of a person possibly that says yes or no to something that we're all so convinced about. We are up, we all want to move towards this reciprocity and reciprocal benefits. So I'm part of assessors now and evaluators in funding schemes that are really trying to push for that. You have to demonstrate reciprocity, and that's really hard. So there's always a feeling that one community feels left out, or that you're putting a little bit more into that or that. So you finding a way to speak in one voice to demonstrate that at the end, this output or the process to that output is valuable in equal measures to both or three or whatever, how many communities and disciplines. That's challenging, but I think we're changing that landscape and moving in that direction, to really get to that final truly reciprocal space, zone, I want to say. So my reflection on birthing those spaces, I like that, on an institutional level, so much, it takes so much energy. It takes a lot of time, and that's something that is not afforded to someone who is still in the run. So I don't have a permanent position, and which is like the holy grail for the academics yet. And this is difficult because I've been turned down from the traditional paths and positions because I do too much of the other, or it doesn't fit the mold, or it's something that they're not familiar with. And if 99% or if 99 applicants are one way and one is different, then that's not always something that is awarded. So it takes a lot of time and effort. It takes individuals that are on board. So it's like a campaign to get those individuals together. I'm very lucky where I am now that there are these individuals that see it, that are part of it, that believe in it as well, that know that there's so much value of going wider, that are making those spaces. And I mean the time for me. It sometimes then hits this glass ceiling. So I'm really working very, very hard to break that glass ceiling also for all the others. I think to demonstrate that it's possible and to breaking that is one of my massive goals. To have, learners see that we are making spaces for that. And I feel like other countries, other universities, maybe steps further. And I can definitely see that in other fields, and I mean this very broadly. So in the applied sciences, I feel like they're much further than in the fundamental pure blue sky research that I'm part of. When you can have a purposeful output, say to help solve global challenges, then there is much more transdisciplinarity, much more looking at lived experiences and knowledge from outside of academia. Whereas if you want to understand how the universe works, which is the domain that I'm in, they're not quite there yet to understanding that having an artist or someone else involved, how could that help? There's more connection with philosophy, and then it's only half a step further towards the arts, I feel like. So there are spaces that are created demonstrating the importance. And so my weapon there is to give it to them or give it to all of us in the language that my colleagues understand, which is research papers. And that's, again, where this meta research comes in. So it's the way that I think I can understand it the best, but it's also a way that I hope convinces others to invest in it, because it is a long-term investment to really change the way that we do research. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to do that now, where we have so many external and internal challenges. And I'm talking about AI and digital creativity. And, you don't have to know about how galaxies evolve in order to be concerned about AI. But we're using AI all the time to answer how galaxies evolve. So we need to communicate with these other voices that are exploring the same topics. Did I get somewhere towards answering?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to say, this project of translation, which sits at an essence in what we do as artists across the artistic disciplines too. And it's really transforming one mode into another, really, as we research and unpack, and often the least of it is language, that which is written and spoken. But what it allows us to do often, as you say, is lean into those complexities. And so I would agree with you that the arts has a tendency towards the expansionist, and towards that kind of divergent thinking. But that's where that kind of beautiful seesaw relationship with science becomes that potential dance, rather than the battle or the dismissal of one another. When I think about the kind of barrenness or the infertility of the institutional spaces within which we find ourselves, I think this condition is not a mistake. This is a space that is easily controllable, and where the profit-driven space, the profit-driven possibilities are optimal, right? So people like yourself and ourselves, who are difficult to control, who are anomalies within that, are unwanted, because you can't easily put a box around you. And yet, what is becoming apparent within the institutional spaces is that these spaces are in a state of collapse. They are no longer serving society, or the ways in which they seemed to serve a society. The cracks and the fissures are very evident, and society is starting to notice them and become pissed off, right? So in order for them to remain active on any level, in order for the taxpayer to remain willing for their money to go towards any of these public institutions, they need to work hard to become relevant again. And inclusivity is part of that. So they actually need us as agents. And they're slowly but surely trying to work out how to control us in order to invite us in. And so we are doing a dance with them. and we have some sort of power, as I can see it. But just from the arts perspective, a year and a bit ago, I wrote a paper called "The Donkey is Desperate." And that was in relation to the way in which arts institutions treat the artist. So they exist for the pure purposes of holding artists, and yet they treat the artist as the lowest common denominator and as the donkey in the hierarchy of needs. And I think that model exists throughout. And those people doing the work, the artists and the scientists within these institutions, are the people that actually have to find one another, because ultimately these institutions exist because of the work that we're doing, and we're made to sort of battle each other for these grants and for these spaces, when in actual fact our pursuits on a human and empathic level are one and the same. But we've been shown to we've been convinced that we're fighting for the same resources in a way. And I think that a lot of the time the aggression in the 20 years of art science projects that Marcus and I have done, at least, that when we felt a kind of discomfort and at times aggression from science communities, it's been about, well, there's only limited resources and the art kind of come in and take it. And this divergent convergent idea is like there's actually more than we think there is, even from a resource perspective, in terms of what we could be fertilizing and generating versus trying to begging bowl mentality of this little bit, this little pot that we're all trying to get for the same project.
Yeah, that resonates so much. I mean, maybe another question is this an ideal? Are we chasing an ideal that is hard to achieve in reality?
Sure.
But that does come back to why we do it in the first place. So why are you personally bouncing in your own brain between these two worlds? Because you're not. Because for you, in your mind, these two worlds belong together. And you might have separated them because you've had to somewhere, but as a person, our lived experience does not exist in silos. Our lived experience, we do things as bodies, as organisms, we exist. And so therefore the question is, maybe it's not you're talking about it as being an ideal, but I actually think it's something that comes from who we are as humans. Just somehow the structure has separated these things out. The structure around us has, maybe Yogi, you could say something about the mechanistic world, done exactly that. It has taken our systems and mechanized it so far that we've actually torn ourselves apart and saying, I'm a scientist, I'm an artist, I have to identify this way, I have to do that way, and be within that binary relationship, rather than saying I'm a whole, and therefore the structure should offer me that which you're calling ideal now, when I think it's essential for survival.
Yes, but I think I'm not as whole perhaps in my brain as maybe you are, as in I do have a constant push and pull, and I cannot use the same method to reach to the same point. So I haven't fully merged it in my brain. There is still, and I think that's a good thing, a conflict in there, but I can see how this kind of conflict is helping me to move forward. Because research or knowledge production is not just a one way, because it relates to so many things. It's not the individual who sits down, locks them in their room and just becomes brilliant by doing the one thing all the time. At least that's not creating the big leaps, the big groundbreaking stuff. And so if you are a complex person, which our brains are, then having different paths towards the next step is a good thing. And for me, say, using the same scientific techniques, but on a completely unrelated image or something like that, just opens up so much. It just gives much more freedom if I remove the scientific intent from it, and if I can expand it to just play, because what art to me does a lot is the experimentation and the free play, and that loosens up my otherwise very kind of driven and rigid state of scientific next step is this, and allows for failure, which is the big topic for me in my arts practice, is to deal with errors and mistakes and failures of the instruments that we're dealing with, of the humans, so to emphasize that we're human beings that are making, that are producing the science. So to really look at this situated knowledge of how science is produced and to loosen it up. But it's not a complete blend of colors here. It's still
yes, but
very...
it still happens in one. It still happens in one mind.
It happens in one mind. Yes,
one mind. It's happening in
but
one being.
yeah,
And I think that's
maybe an useful concept from cognitive science is opponent processing. So what happens often is that you are actually playing as the same person, different strategies against each other, and humans are amazing at keeping cognitive dissonance in their heads, as we know. So we are very good at actually playing sometimes contradictory strategies against each other, and then very flexibly or opportunistically choosing those that serve us best in a given situation. And that's part of the creative process. And I think that's what if we do this, we bump against the boundaries we've created in the institutions are inhibiting that sort of free play where things don't have to be coherent all the time. When you write the grant proposal, you have to have a coherent plan for the next 3 or 5 years to do research. And that's if you actually follow up on that plan, then you can conclusively say that the research project has failed because you haven't found anything new. you followed your plan, right? So it's completely absurd, this kind of accountability. So how do we create these open spaces? And I want to quickly come back to this point that you said, is it an ideal that we cannot reach? So I want you to speculate for just a minute or two. What is the kind of institutional structure that allows you, that enables you to do this and be the scientist at the same time? So what would that look like? Where do you want to get to when you succeed?
Yeah. I'll get there by way of saying that there are so many grassroots initiatives, right? I mean, we're stuck into several of them ourselves, but I see it also at the institutional level, at the universities. There's so many groups even within my university here that are coming together from different disciplines as researchers, practice people and things like that. So there is the willingness that comes, I think, from the artists and the scientists themselves and to create those space. So like the ZoNE or like SEADS or like the ARTlab that I'm producing, there are these places that are chasing or that are enabling space for this ideal. And so to allow for that and to allow for the growth of that would be my vision, to have really impactful, as in you can also at the level of the higher decision makers level demonstrate that for not just one type of person, but for the entire institution, this is valuable and actually needs to be supported. Because, and this goes back to what Bronwyn said, to reach out to society, and yes, this is more important than ever to not be completely separated from society. And so this kind of space to allow it to grow, to not just have we are squeezing it in at 7 p.m. to who is available to meet every 3 months, but to make it part of our everyday research, to, like I see it with the ARTlab, what we're doing, to have really joint projects, joint problem framing, joint, this is sharing of of understandings. So truly lived inter and transdisciplinarity in the corners of the universities that usually don't do inter and transdisciplinarity, like the fundamental physics that I'm part of. However, we are dealing with the same problems like the people that are already doing the transdisciplinarity. We're dealing with complex big problems. We're dealing with complex data that is coming to us like tsunami waves. We don't know how to handle that. We are, the stakes are so high with what is happening in the world now. So to see that and to financially and just structurally support these spaces and that means make it part of the teaching so that the next generation or the current generation knows how to work across boundaries, and make it part of the research so that the outputs, there's so many questions related to that. How does the authorship work? For one discipline, you need to publish in this journal. For the other discipline, you need to publish in that one. All these questions need to be addressed, and it takes time. We know from so much research from the ITD, inter and transdisciplinarity field, we know all the challenges. We've done this for years, understanding what the challenges are. We come up with some solutions. We now need to put those solutions into practice and to expand it also to the fundamental research.
So one more question. I mean, how is this possible in a system that is so accelerated like we are in academic research and even in the production of art at the moment? What role do you think does it play? So in my opinion, the first thing we need to do to enable this space and to create these niches for this to happen is that we need to slow down.
Slow productivity. Yes, I like that movement too. How to do that? I think it is that feedback loop that you have to create, the conversations with the policy makers, with the funders. There are, at least here, there are calls for research that are in direct conversation with the funders. So I think a lot of the inter and transdisciplinarity is related to funding structures of and policy and decision makers. So to link those communities more, more than, well, it's already happening. I think there is a change, don't you think, in at least in the current cohort of students. I see that there is a much more putting the foot down and saying no to some of the absurd demands that are being put there. The outcome is that we're often losing really good people to just, okay, I cannot deal with this, and just leave. So to keep the really motivated people, and it's hard for me to say that because I'm in that rat's wheel myself, right? How long can you just keep running? Again, I think it goes back to those individuals, to having the personal experience of what the worth of this is, to convince them. If it stays abstract, I'm struggling with the words of really just describing the impact and the value. Whereas if someone experiences it, it's plain, it's obvious. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I was part of an event where we had first talks about art and science and what art does, and this was all geared towards scientists, and then a workshop where they actually, created art related to somehow related to their science doing. And there was a lot of apprehension at the beginning because, oh, I haven't done art in 30 years or whatever. And then towards the end, we all shared what we produced and what it meant. And I was floored by just what within just an hour or something, they really came up with something meaningful that had a personal little micro breakthrough in something, or just this is how I can now communicate it better, like peers, or I understand it better by creating the thing I'm struggling with. So it was for all of them not only a positive experience, but really a meaningful one. And so sense making is something that's so important for understanding and for really pushing forward. And it's hard to have a metric for that, right? I'm being asked now, well, is it reproducible? What's the error budget for this? Like, how it's a different way of judging and quality. So it's a very personal one, but the feedback from all these people that were part of the workshop was phenomenal, you know? So how can all these little post-it note feedback things, how can we now tell the decision makers and the funders and the policy makers that we need to enable that? I don't know, that's the space I'm in right now that I'm struggling with, to distill the experiences and give it to them and say, help us. We need more of that because our problems are big.
So there's a book by historian Jerry Muller against metrics, and saying that most of the most valuable qualities of research and art are not measurable. Originality, creativity, all these kind of aspects. And we need to get back to what you said very early on. There is in the University of Vienna here a group that looks at the way we assess. Katja Meyer's group, they study how we assess research projects, and they're pushing very strongly for a processual sort of assessment, and they also push for qualitative assessment, like you just said. And one interesting thing is that we have usually external panels that look at the quality of a process, and it has to be at least mixed, because you have to have mentors of a project that are in the panel. These are the only people that know the process. Because the external panel by definition doesn't know the process, only the outcome of the report at the end by definition. So we need to move away from expert panels. It would also save us a lot of CO2 these people produce by flying around the world, by the way. And
well, they're mostly online now.
That's true. Involve people in the process itself, which is often seen as a conflict, because you're not supposed to have someone who's interested in the positive outcome. But if somebody's interested in a good outcome, they are also a good assessors, because they have skin in the game. That's a kind of lack of neutrality that is not bad, because they are interested in the good outcome of the project, and there's a mentality change that needs to happen.
Can you repeat that group here in Vienna?
Yes, please.
So
should have known about them a few weeks ago.
She's extremely hard to get a hold of, because she's obviously very busy. But so she's in the Science, Technology and Society STS department of the University of Vienna, and there I've been working as in my function as someone who's advocating open science with their work, and was trying to collaborate with them as well. But they are extremely busy because there's so much need for this. And I think you're right in that a lot of people see that we're running the system against the wall, and we need change, even among the policymakers and the funders. And also, I think a lot of people on both sides of the arts and the sciences are a little bit bored with what we're producing, because we're not producing conceptually interesting stuff. We're producing a lot. We're producing a lot based on a lot of new data, as you said, right? But we're not actually producing a lot of conceptual breakthroughs, for example, of seeing the world with different eyes.
Yeah,
we need to reintegrate philosophy into our work in both art and science as well, in a way that is not superficial. And so I think these are things that come together that resonate a lot. And I agree with you. It's not hopeless, but as you said, you sort of burn out sometimes and you're getting tired of banging against the wall. So how does your art practice also help you cope with that?
Yes, I think it, yeah, the practice helps me to see this ideal in the small, on the small scale, because because I experience the positive benefits firsthand, and in the people that are around me. So these days the majority of art that I make is collaborative, and so I can see it not only in me but in others as well. But collaboration always means also conflict, or pushing through some sticky aspects and coming out through on the other end and being really proud of what you produce. And so yeah, that helps, because we're all in the same boat as well. We have different angles of attacking maybe, or approaching better. I don't want to be too graphic in the language here. But that's why we're speaking, right? Because we understand the frustration. When I speak to inter and transdisciplinary researchers, they are totally understand that frustration too. One of the first things many people have told me is that many give up. There is actually a paper about this. I'm giving up, I can't anymore. What is that called? Of by an interdisciplinary researcher. It's like I'm leaving. It's too much, and made a paper out of that, which is a very interesting read. I'll find that and send that to you too. So it's definitely a very common phenomenon to just, I'm at the end of this burning candle and I have to leave. And that's something that is happening whether you're trying to join disciplines or not. I mean, so many good people are leaving silently or not. This silent quitting, or what it is now, because of our university structures. And the scientists are equally just overwhelmed with all the demands. Our demands are just growing from inside and outside. There's a lot to shoulder. And I feel like, as I saw in that workshop, and as I see every day in my practice, that art can be also just a really good relief and release of that kind of tension, of coming together on a different level, of having fun, of playing, of seeing your data in a different way, of just detaching yourselves from all the pressure, and that is so valuable to just loosen up for new ideas, for those groundbreaking pushes that are needed.
I mean, on the flip side, as you said, the very often the tension, the aggression, the attack that's involved in making a work, even just the brutal act of putting one dot onto this canvas, is something that you do very well, that one does, or assumes that it's a very easy process. And you're talking about play and experimentation almost as if it's something that doesn't have the other side to it, and that is a very deep process of sense making that we just can't operate in the same way. And I think that the trust and the vulnerability and the relationship that you have to your medium and to your audience and to your concept is so densely packed that, and I have to say this in a constructive way, I don't mean to diminish any art that someone makes in an hour to try and put a point across, but that there is in everyone the need to express and create and play and explore. But there is a point at which that is done for therapy, that is done for group dynamics, that is done for communication, that is done for certain targets and objectives. And then there is, and I guess that's where I would say is the kind of another approach or another way of understanding it is a little bit like in the sciences, where I can make science and play, but then someone's going to tell me, but you haven't had a breakthrough, or you haven't proven anything other. I can be an amateur astronomer gladly anytime, but then what? Then I need to take the next step. and it's only within the depth of trying to explore that medium or that discipline or that search for knowledge, and maybe it is the hunter attitude that's needed to a certain extent, that you reach a completely different level of understanding how that discipline really impacts and changes your life. So the moment that group, for example, does that, and it does something to them, and they look at their lab in a different way because they've been in the studio, or they look at their writing in a different way because they've had a different medium to play with, we often stop there and we often just let that happen, and that's great. But it's almost like it needs that acknowledgement of that vulnerability that you feel the first time when you say, well, I haven't made art in 30 years, to say that is the same vulnerability that happens every time you face an artwork. That's the same vulnerability that you have, whether you've done it yesterday or 5 minutes ago, you're still in a state of complexity.
The permanent condition that is
permanent state of mind. Yeah, it's a permanent condition. And I think that permanent condition is one that gets lost because we become so quick at making a mark or doing a drawing or applying a certain scientific formula that we think is the one to take us forward, you know, the pursuits that we're with. And I can't, when I hear us all talk about, let's show people how to make art in order to break through their ways, I kind of, I know it's not what you meant, and maybe
you misunderstood. My argument really is going back to that it's all part of the process.
Exactly.
So it's all those little things are our everyday process of getting a tiny step closer to that breakthrough. And it can be a personal breakthrough. You know, that aha moment when you actually understand something. There are different ways that you need to get there. So that personal art making could be a part of that process, but there are many, many other ways too, like engaging with the other, all of that. So again, not focusing so much on the output, but on the process that gets us to the output.
And would you say maybe finding comfort in the vulnerability and the uncertainty of the next step? I think
or acceptance, not it's never comfortable, but
it's not comfortable, it's acceptance. So it's saying that this is part of it. So therefore, stop trying to feel comfortable or happy in that state that you're in.
But I think that's something that artists and scientists have very much in common, that you always live in that space of ambiguity, of pushing into something that is unknown. It's actually identified, ambiguity is identified as a big factor in art science. So there's, where are we actually? Let's find out that place, what makes sense in here. That's like the constant state of a researcher, because you're trying to create new knowledge that hasn't been there. So by definition, you're vulnerable and pushing into a space that's unknown. And that's like, you've signed up for that when you become an artist or a scientist.
Those common denominators are really valuable to understand. I mean, there's common denominators. That instead of focusing on the difference, it's focusing on that.
Absolutely. And there are several of those, and experimentation is one of them, and this ambiguity is another one of them. And so that's what the social science meta-research shows us is, okay, here are the spheres of overlap, or this landscape of art science technology. This and this is something that we can focus on, that we can start with when we work together.
So as Marcus was speaking, but in your response, Ulrike, one of the final chapters of Robin Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass came to me, in which she describes the first rains after winter in this part of North America, and the salamanders and the amphibians in the forest being woken up by who are kind of hibernating under the leaves, and the snow being woken up by this rain falling, and doing that mass migration under the cover of night. And, you know, this being this ancient ritual of moving across the forest and down to the pools at the bottom. But what has sadly happened in the meantime is that there's this, whilst this is a protected nature area reserve, there is a free-for-all road that now runs across it. And so over this road come these cars at breakneck speed, and of course they squish and kill hundreds of thousands of these amphibians. And so she describes in this rain and in this state herself, her daughters, and a group of concerned people from the area trying desperately to lift them across the road as quickly as possible and scooping up these slow, soft-bodied animals as one at a time, you know, and just taking them across. She's an incredibly poetic writer, and it's essentially just this throughout the book, basically, because you're getting to the end. It's also this constant lesson and education in the beingness of and the peopling of all other living beings that are not Homo sapien, but who deserve a level of sort of respect, and whose intelligence needs to be considered alongside our own. And so the condition of being vulnerable, slow, and soft, and she describes, you know, what it must feel like for the salamander's soft belly to be scraping along that gravel tarmac, just reminded me of what we're talking about as these individuals, and that I think we all resonate with what that condition of soft and slow and empathic is in these spaces, knowing that those are both cures, but they're also impossible conditions to be. And it sounds easy, it sounds almost lazy, but it's in fact the most challenging state to hold. The vulnerable, the soft, the slow. And I think to be slow in these spaces right now is a battle bar none. And those who are, I mean, I recently wrote for the Slow Journal, which is based in the Netherlands. And I know the people running that, ironically, are incredibly stressed, you know, because they're doing groundbreaking work, but they're also, their fight and flight is probably not running at a normal, their own systems are probably firing on really dangerous cylinders. But this is a condition we should be advocating for. And going back to that, you know, sometimes having started an institute in South Africa called the Center for the Less Good Idea, we often talk about failure. And I noticed that, you know, failure again and the bad idea is we're deliberately wanting to avert or to challenge this idea of optimization, not because we're interested in bad ideas or because we don't think it's worth pursuing good ideas, but because we know that the good idea has to take time. It has to take time to sit in all of its cracks and its stickiness. It has to be slow. It has to meet the world. And one of the kind of situations that she describes as this, there is no good solution to this salamander problem, which is that another group arrives to rescue this or to be there for the salamanders on that same night of the first rains. But they are a study group from the university, and they are there to try to convince and change policy around, but what they need to do is collect data, and they need to try to understand how many salamanders are squished. So they actually need the salamanders to die that night, and she's trying to rescue them. Their project is the same. Their concerns and their hearts is in the same place, but she's lifting them off the road and the others are looking for blots of red muck and trying to measure the muck. In what size muck constitutes what species of salamander. And it's such an unbelievably potent metaphor for where we are right now.
Yeah, I absolutely, I agree. And I mean, there's a good reason why this book has been such a big influence for many in art science, I think. It is quite telling that, this botanist that's had so much to say writes it at a relatively late stage in her career as well, right? Could a PhD student have written this? I don't know. So, or the people that are speaking up about slow productivity and that are making these changes are usually settled and are, tenured and have nothing to worry about, if you wish, because those that are otherwise are just silently leaving. But at least it's part of the conversation. At least it's on the radar now, and there is some kind of change. And it's interesting that you say that that journal, they're all stressed out, even though they're advocating for another way of doing. I feel like knowing this and saying this is already doing so much. Or that I listened to the podcast, The Happiness Lab, you may be familiar with, Professor Laurie Santos from Yale, and she is a very, very successful researcher on the science of happiness and advocates for all these wonderful techniques to improve your well-being and happiness. And yet now she's talking about her own perfectionism and all these things. So kind of openly showing that vulnerability is so important, and that's what I'm trying to do too. Like my breakdowns are because I've hit a wall or something, to share that with people and to make that known. Also, I mean, there is when you mentioned that journal, the journal of trial and error came to my mind. So it's also a space for experiments that had null results or that failed to publish that, because we are in this position where we are afraid to publish experiments that didn't go the way that was planned. And so where would we be then if we don't tell if something doesn't work? It's so important. And anomalies and outliers are the thing that advance our models. So that's a big worry that I have, that we are, pushing for statistical trends and are missing the outliers that are so important to actually evolve our models and understandings. So to focus on those anomalies, on those outliers, on those ideas that are initially, not supported by those big structures. And another thing that came to my mind while you spoke is the unknown unknowns. When we are doing this, when we're giving space for that, you don't know what amazing things come out. And I think Braiding Sweetgrass, the book, is an example of that. I mean, there was no research plan that had work package 7, write this book, right? And yet it had so much impact. So you don't know the unknown unknowns. It's just the things that are happening that you cannot plan, and we're making the space for this. And that's what drives me, what drives us, I think, to allow for some of the ambitious, for the risks, for the growing of these. And I mean, Tomás Saraceno's work with the Galaxies and Filaments, which happens to be the research I'm also doing. It was not only in the Venice Biennale, but also Bruno Latour wrote about this and linked it to social structures and sociology. And it's just, you don't know where it gets picked up and which spheres of knowledge it impacts.
Yeah, exactly. And to wear the politics of it a bit lightly and talk about those unknowns and unknown unknowns and the outliers and anomalies. I think when we're all sitting in Europe right now and we're talking largely about European institutions, but a huge percentage of the world and the world's people who do not have access to these spaces as researchers, do not have access because of the color of their skin or their identity, through the kind of sordid history that Europe represents and continues to represent. And so Robin Kimmerer in North America is an anomaly as an Indigenous person, to have come through as the level of plant scientist that she is, and to still represent her Indigenous wisdom and to know it in the way that she does in her body, and have the voice to represent it, and have both voices that are so integrated at this point in her life. So that is why this book resonates. And I think that that this is not art or science. It's a reflection on a kind of humanity that is astonishing, but it also should be every day. And it isn't, unfortunately, because there are so many Robins out there actually, in every part of the world. And there are people living in Austria right now. There are people living in the UK who would have never had access because of the social, economic, political conditions and histories of our countries that have disallowed them access to the institution. And those kinds of collaborations, which I think maybe more so in art practice, because of the way in which artists commune with communities and work in a communal way, allow a kind of a translation of particular wisdoms into institutional thinking. And so it becomes a kind of evidence potentially for why this avenue of collaboration and then ultimately transdisciplinary practice gives us something.
Thank you for reminding me of that, because I sometimes often get stuck so deep into that tunnel of the institution that I'm in, that I need someone to help me pull that head out of there. And I get that through the art and collaborating with artists that are so passionate about breaking down all of these disciplines and, indisciplinarity, queering of knowledge, all of this is much stronger, from my understanding and my experience, through the art practice, because it's just, their art is just cranking up the urgency of these very important topics, can be political, wants to be political, and wants to be subjective in ways that the science is very rarely, and is so bowing to the institutions that are enabling the science, because otherwise you cannot just fund your own CERN or Hubble Space Telescope. It's just you're kind of in so it's through the arts that I get that whiplash. Oh yes, actually 99% or whatever of people don't know or don't care or have other issues that are equally urgent and valuable and important, and just to widen again the perspective, and this is the reality. You're only looking at a very small part of the reality, and oh yes, I'm being very small again. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
No, an hour and a half into this, so how are you gonna edit that down to?
We probably need to wrap it up. Otherwise, it's not possible for everybody else to absorb. But it's been so rich.
Very rich. I think your last point is also very nice to maybe round it off on, because I think the reality is that coming full circle, we are sitting in the studio, you're busy drawing on this drawing behind me, we're talking, and yet not really concentrating on conversation, but rather allowing these multi-forms of conversation, drawing and making all fuse into each other. And now having the Zoom conversation, following some of our in-between talks, was actually a very nice summary of a lot that we've been through already, Ulrike. I think it's
yeah,
quite a nice
absolutely.
summary, and the last point really brought it home for me as a reminder. So thank you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Well, you're very welcome. I think that another thing that art can do is this thinking through art, like into art, but through art and about art. It's just, it also enables that flow, right? So we were sitting and doing and talking, and we're just continuing that conversation now. So thank you for inviting me. It's really wonderful.
Thank you.
There was one comment that you made that reassured something about that we've been going through over the last few years, and that is that you using philosophy as one of the steps to get a bit closer to the scientists in terms of how, the art and science meeting through the conduit of philosophy. And I think that's been really exciting in our conversations internally in terms of what we've been doing with Yogi and how we've been throwing our world into a completely different mix. We very rarely just speak of anything science or art related. It becomes all about philosophy as a translating tool for all of these things. So that was really a nice internal acknowledgement for me, just to remind myself that yes, it's just another language system, another process we're going through, and it's a healthy one because it's that other perspective that you sometimes need. So thanks for that as a little reflection on something you said that just slipped by, but I actually ended up taking pages worth of notes just because of that one comment.
Right.
Anyway.
Fantastic.
Are there any last words before we wrap it up?
I still am sitting here with this idea, juggling the idea of whether to change the institutions or just wait for them to destroy themselves and then pick up the rubble. I've by now, at my old cynical age, decided to go for the latter strategy. But I really think what you're doing is amazing, and you're having an impact. It's just frustratingly slow for you to see because you're in the middle of the process yourself. And then it seems like you're treading molasses and you're not getting anywhere. But it's also important to look back over a longer time span and see.
That's it. Yeah. Actually, when I do that, I can see all the things that have happened already and all the individuals that are, on board and that we've impacted through this. And that's just marvelous. And I'm not yet done.
You just have to pat yourself back sometimes, along the way, I think, because otherwise you burn out.
To have all these people surrounding me that are doing that and that are believing and that are telling me how important without that, I don't think I would still do it because of the frustration, but because there are so many individuals that tell me how important and that believe in this and in me, that makes me keep going. Right. And so are you. We're just on different paths, but pushing and pulling towards similar goals. And I'm so glad that I'm part of that kind of network and we can exchange our brains.
I like James Carse's finite play is according to the rules and infinite play is with the rules. So you play to change the rules. It's like Calvin ball. The only rule in Calvin ball is that you never can play the game with the same rules twice.
Okay.
So that's from the Calvin.
So everything is very meta, right? Yeah. Everything comes back to meta research. This is where we started.
That's how we started. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
I just wanted to say the last thing, that there's a book by Kohei Saito which is called Slow Down, and he was interviewed and he said he, just like a normal Japanese academic, he works 60 hours a week, and the journalist was asking, what absurdity to write a book about slowing down with the lifestyle you have, and he said yes, so this is the sacrifice of this generation for the next one, hopefully. I thought this was both depressing and awful, but it is also important to acknowledge that it's the absurdity of our situation in a system that doesn't really enable us, as you said really nicely in the recorded part of the conversation. It's not an enabling infrastructure that we have around us. It's a constraining one. So yeah, we have to break out.
Well, let's hold on to the grassroots and to punch the glass ceiling. That's the goal.